do need to record.
It shows it's live, at least on my end. Good stuff, good stuff. All right. Cool. So welcome, Doctor. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Very good, very good. So for those of you joining us on Facebook and on YouTube, please feel free to leave comments today as we are streaming live, and we will try to get to your questions either during the presentation if there's availability or afterward. And further, if you are wanting to join a Zoom meeting, feel free to visit our website, www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. The website again is www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. So with that being said, you can register on the website and join on the Zoom link through the website. However, you are more than welcome to leave your comments in the live stream. So we will be taking a look at that between Jeremiah and I, at least for now. So welcome everyone who's joining in on Zoom. Welcome. So Dr. Nicholson, how has your morning been? What time is it over there?
Just after 1 a.m.
Just after 1 a.m. So it is May 10th in Australia right now, right?
Correct.
So we are speaking on Sunday, May 9th at 11 a.m. And over in Australia, Dr. is joining us from time 1 a.m. on May 10th. So we are spanning 2 days.
Yeah. But we're all connected. That's the amazing thing.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
The world has shrunk.
I wonder why.
That could be a subject of another program.
Indeed, indeed. So with that being said, and people joining on, I'm going to be giving the introductions for Dr. Graham Nicholson, who graduated with LLB honors in the University Western Australia in the mid-1960s. He has practiced law briefly as a solicitor before moving to Darwin in 1974 as a public lawyer. He was first a member of the new NT Department of Law on grant of the NT self-government. Is that the Northern Territory?
Yes, correct.
Okay. The first Northern Territory Crown Solicitor. Later, he became the Northern Territory Senior Crown Counsel with the Northern Territory Department of Justice and signed the bar roll. He has been legal advisor to various Northern Territory Legislative Assembly committees on constitutional development. And it says LLM-UQ. Could you clarify that?
That's a Master of Laws at the University of Queensland.
So Dr. Nicholson, he has his Master of Law from the Master of Law, correct?
Correct.
The Master of Law from University of Queensland. Yeah, the LLM, we have that degree here in America, and it's I see very universal in that sense as well.
Yeah.
He is also former adjunct professor in law to Northern Territory University, now CDU. He's retired from the department in 1998 and has practiced as a barrister at law, lecturer in law, and recently retired. He is the former proprietor of the Hidden Words Workshop in Kuranda.
Bookshop?
The Hidden Word Bookshop,
Bookshop. Yeah.
Hidden Words Bookshop, Kuranda, to the end of 2019. And he is widely published. And his PhD was awarded at CDU in 2019. Were they CDU or Northern Territory University in 2019?
It's the same thing. I just had a name change.
Yeah, was their name change before or after?
It was a few years ago that changed the name. It's now Charles Darwin University.
Charles Darwin University.
Yeah, because although Darwin didn't actually visit Darwin, his boat passed that way on his great voyage.
So he never landed, he never visited the port, but because he passed by.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Dr. Nicholson is going to be elaborating a lot better on this. However, as a short summary, the subject is this sense of unity that our Creator has provided us from our physical and spiritual beginnings, starting in Africa, together from one place, united. We have dispersed throughout the world. Humanity now has colonized the whole planet. And with today's emergence of the Baha'i revelation, we have once again been called to unity, this time the world over. And Dr. Graham Nicholson is going to be speaking on this beautiful topic, the subject of world unity. And with that being said, Dr. Nicholson, could you take it from here?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome. And I hope some more will join us in a moment. So I'm using quotes from the Baha'i writings and other religions, because I'm looking at unity not only in a physical sense, but also a spiritual sense. So when I talk about the cycle of unity, from its beginning to its end, I'm talking about both physical and spiritual. And I'd like to begin, if I may. I've got the PowerPoint program in front of me. I'd like to begin by reading a short prayer of Abdul Baha. It's not quite so short. On this theme: O Almighty God, O Thou compassionate one, this servant of thine has hastened to the regions of the west from the utmost parts of the east, that perchance these nostrils may be perfumed with the fragrance of thy bestowals, that the breeze of the rose garden of guidance may blow over these cities, that the people may attain to the capacity of receiving thy favours, that the hearts may be rejoiced through thy glad tidings, that the eyes may behold the light of reality, that the ears may hearken to the call of the kingdom. O Almighty, illumine the hearts, O kind God, make the souls the envy of the rose garden and the meadow. O incomparable beloved, waft the fragrance of thy bounty, radiate the lights of compassion, so that the hearts may be cleansed and purified, and that they may take a share and portion from thy confirmations. Verily, this congregation is seeking thy path, searching for thy mystery, beholding thy face and desiring to be characterized with thine attributes. O Almighty, confer thine infinite bounties, bestow thine inexhaustible treasury, so that these impotent ones may become powerful. Verily, thou art the kind, thou art the generous, thou art the omniscient, the omnipotent. Abdul Baha. So we're searching for, in this program, we're searching for the truth from the origins of humanity, the human race, Homo sapiens, to the present day and where we're heading. And my thesis is that this is one big cycle, and we're heading towards the completion of that cycle. We began as primitive human beings. The preponderance of science is that we began in Africa. We originated in Africa. So I've got some pictures there of early hominids. Of course, there were many hominids, not just Homo sapiens. The only one that survived is Homo sapiens. And spread around the world, became diversified in the one human race until we reach this point now where we're heading back to complete the cycle. So there's little doubt that early forms of hominids, such as Homo erectus, migrated from Africa to other parts of the world many hundreds of thousands of years ago. This led to the Neanderthals, possibly other hominids, occupying parts of the wider world. None of these, apart from Homo sapiens, have survived. Go to the next slide. There was a second wave of migration out of Africa in much more recent times. In fact, I've read some articles recently saying that Homo sapiens came in several waves, but the wave that has gone around the world and inhabited the whole planet is the last wave, and that was in recent times, 100,000 years ago or so. There was at one time an alternate theory that there were Homo sapiens evolved in several places, not just in Africa. But this doesn't seem to be now accepted as the authentic version by those that know. I'm not an anthropologist or a scientist even, but the out of Africa seems to have acquired the greatest acceptance. So if we go to the next slide, that points out the two different theories, monogenesis or multigenesis. And certainly the out of Africa theory is the one that's favoured. There was some evidence of interbreeding with some lesser hominids that seem to have occurred in a number of places, but that hasn't affected the overall development of Homo sapiens. If we go to the next slide. So we can now say that you can see the journal Nature, which had a very interesting article on this. We can now say that all our origins came out of Africa maybe 100,000 years ago or so. We can all be traced back to one small tribe that came out of Africa. It's quite amazing when you think of it. So in that sense, there was a unity. We started at a unity. Go to the next slide. And as I was saying, this is a unity not only in a physical sense, a genetic sense, but also a unity in a spiritual sense, because if we came from one small tribe, there would have been a spiritual aspect to that tribe, and no doubt that was a unified spiritual aspect. We don't know what the nature of those spiritual beliefs were, but certainly the physical and the spiritual go together, in my view. Next slide. I'll just put this in because it may interest people. Flores is a small island to the north west of Australia, not very far away. I've been close to Flores. It's a small island. My wife's visited us. I haven't had the privilege. They found this remains of a small human species there only recently. And there was some debate about whether they were just small Homo sapiens or whether they were a separate hominid. I think the predominant view now is that they were a separate hominid. So they must have come out of Africa even earlier to Homo sapiens and spread right around the planet, down the Malay Peninsula, onto the islands of Indonesia, perhaps when the sea levels were lower. And but they don't exist anymore. But they did live on the Indonesian islands up to a few thousand years ago. Apparently. It's an interesting feature of how the various hominids spread before Homo sapiens. Thank you. Can we move next slide? So we can now say that modern humans had a single physical beginning, just as they had a single spiritual origin from God. They started at a point of unity. So we can say we're all spiritually connected, as well as being physically connected. We're all related. You trace it back through all the generations, everybody on the planet is related to these original Homo sapien migrants that moved out of Africa into the rest of the world. And now in every continent, even Antarctica. Next slide. And when we look at the sacred texts of the great religions, we find this migration is reflected in those writings. Both in the Old Testament, carried forward into the New, and into the Quran. I find this a fascinating thing, that the scriptures reflect monogenesis in both physical and spiritual terms. A fascinating thing. Thank you. Move to the next slide. We're going to now go to some of the readings. I'll move straight on. So we're all familiar with the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad, and thence upon the face of all the earth. Therefore, in the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad on the face of all the earth. Just reflect on that passage. We know that Babel, the Tower of Babel story in the Old Testament, locates that event in the Twin Rivers, now in Iraq. And that's the route that the original people came out of Africa in a small group. They went from the Horn of Africa across the Arabian Peninsula into the Twin Rivers. We know that from the science. And from there, they scattered around the world ultimately to all the continents. So we can see in this text a unity in its origins, which then, as they spread around the world into the various places, became a diversity. I think that's a wonderful passage. If you turn over, I think I've got the next slide is a bit of a reflection on the Tower of Babel story. It's pictured as this giant tower, but really I think it's more importantly, I don't know whether there was a big tower or not, but it's in my thinking, it's a symbol of the movement from unity to diversity, the human dispersion after coming out of Africa. That's my thinking. It's the way the Bible describes it. It has a very profound meaning. Thank you. Now, when I was in Israel, I found out that we go on pilgrimage to Israel, and I found out that there was a migration up the coast of the Mediterranean from Africa as well. It may not have been the last migration of Homo sapiens, but when they were investigating the caves on Mount Carmel, which is where the Baha'i World Centre is, they found evidence of Homo sapiens in these caves, as well as those of Neanderthals, showing that there was a period when these two hominids overlapped. I found that exceedingly interesting. We'll move on. There's just some pictures of the actual caves in Mount Carmel. The Baha'i World Centre is just around a little bit from those caves. Thank you. But the fact is that humanity, as a result of this migration and dispersion, has finished up with a great degree of diversity. And these are reflected in the differences we now know from the different peoples around the planet. Some facial differences, skin color differences, language, culture, and religion, finished up with this great diversity. But still with one species, still Homo sapiens. So you could say that the differences are great between the different peoples in the world, but from another perspective, the differences are not that great because we're still one species, one race. Thank you. So my argument is that dispersion and diversity has now reached its maximum level. It reached that level probably a few centuries ago. So in that sense, it's the maximum diversity is a recent phenomenon. But my argument is that diversity is now in retreat. We saw how through colonization and other events, these different peoples, this great diversity, interacted. And increasingly, there's been more and more contact across these diverse lines. And the differences between people have been breached, and that's greatly increased in more recent times. Which leads me to this conclusion that we began as one unity, we went to a maximum degree of diversity, like in a big cycle, and we're now on the downside, we're coming back together again. The differences are becoming less and less important. So increasingly we have a unity in diversity. I'm not saying the diversity doesn't exist, but as we look at it, the world, we see it like a global village, and the differences are becoming less and less important. And in my argument, we're heading towards a new form of unity, a global unity, based on the interdependence of all peoples on this one small planet. When you get that thinking into your mind, it raises all sorts of questions and challenges as to the way we're organizing this planet. Thank you. So here's a quote from the Baha'i writings. Baha'u'llah has drawn the circle of unity. He has made a design for the uniting of all peoples and for the gathering of them all under the shelter of the tent of universal unity. So we now are in a position where we can perceive the world as one homeland, a world in which we all have a common interest and not separate diverse interests. Or if we do have separate diverse interests, they're much less important. This perception, I think, is very important. So for convenience, we can call this cycle the Adamic cycle, in the sense that it's a physical cycle that began from one surviving tribe or community in Africa that dispersed worldwide. And that's to distinguish it from the spiritual cycle, which we can also call Adamic, which began with the first historically recorded prophet of our one supreme God, who perhaps we can call Adam. Perhaps this is a new reflection on the biblical story of Adam, that he can be regarded, perhaps amongst other things, as the first mediator between God and man. Thank you. So my argument is that the physical cycle and the spiritual cycle go hand in hand. So just as we're gradually coming together as one human race, one species, we're also gradually coming together in a spiritual sense. So all these ancient religious differences, all this diversity, the prejudices that go with it, they're now being challenged. And we're being challenged to see the truth in all the great religions, not as exclusive, but as all parts of this one great cycle that are gradually being brought together. Thank you. So let's have a look at some of the sacred writings and a few other comments that I've just extracted to help us reflect on the concept, the thesis I'm putting forward. Central to that is the view that man or humanity is one family. Very powerful concept, I think. This is from National Geographic. Some of my quotes are a little bit a few years ago because I prepared this program a few years ago. A massive new study of human genetic diversity reveals surprising insights into our species' evolution and migrations, including support for the theory that the first modern humans originated in Africa, scientists said today. Researchers compared 650,000 genetic markers in nearly 1,000 individuals from 51 populations around the globe, an unprecedented level of detail for a human genetic study. Such a pattern fits the theory that the first modern humans settled the world in stepping stone fashion after leaving Africa less than 100,000 years ago. And from the Holy Quran, this is an actual quote from the Quran. Mankind were one community. Mankind were one community, then they differed. And we have sundered them in the earth as separate nations. Had Allah willed it, he could have made you all one nation. But he sendeth whom he will astray and guideth whom he will. Am I going too fast for anybody? If anybody wants to comment, please don't let me dominate this talk. A Baha'i quote. Mankind has been created from one single origin, has branched off from one family. Thus, in reality, all mankind represents one family. God has not created any difference. He has created all as one, that thus this family might live in perfect happiness and well-being. Now, these are some comments that I just selected at random, really. Josephine Baker, I looked up Josephine Baker. She was a Black American, American-born French entertainer, but she was also a resistance agent during the war and a civil rights activist. She lived from 1906 to 1975. So some of you may have heard of Josephine Baker, coming from the US. Surely the day will come when colour means nothing more than skin tone, when religion is seen uniquely as a way to speak of one's soul, when birthplaces have the weight of a throw of the dice, and all men are born free, when understanding breeds love and brotherhood. And Thomas Merton was an American Trappist monk, also a writer, theologian, mystic, and social activist. He lived from 1915 to 1968. And he says, we are already one, but we imagine that we are not. And what we have to recover is our original unity. But what we have to be is what we are. Thank you. Next one. And Baha'u'llah says, that's the founder, prophet of the Baha'i faith, you are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch, a very famous quote. So, isn't it interesting? I've got all my quotes are related to Americans or America. Suits my old audience, I think. New York Times. Scientists say the human species is so young on an evolutionary scale, and its migratory pattern so wide, restless, and rococo, that it has not had a chance to divide into separate biological groups or races in any but the most superficial ways. Race is a social concept, not a scientific one, says Dr. Craig Venter. The researchers unanimously declare that this is only one race, the human race. And the Reverend Warfield, I looked him up. He was an American Protestant pastor and theologian. And he said the unity of the human race, monogeneticism, is one of the most important matters in Christian theology. Theology is more concerned with the proof that man is one rather than the near or far antiquity of man. Polygeneticism, that is multiple origins, that's that alternative theory I was talking about, is far more damaging to theology than any teaching of the vast antiquity of man. In Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, we've got two quotes. In origin and intention of creation, mankind is one. Distinctions of race and color have arisen afterward. And mankind has been created from one single origin, has branched off from one family. Thus, in reality, all mankind represents one family. God has not created any difference. Now, just a few pictures of diversity. We can move on. Next quote. Now, this and the next page are quotes from George Townsend. George Townsend was an Anglican archdeacon from Ireland who became a hand of the cause of God in the Baha'i faith and was an author and is highly regarded amongst Baha'is. He wrote, "The Bible is a study of world history. It is man's first effort to write a complete history of the human race from its beginning to its climax in the unification of all peoples and the establishment of a universal religion. The Bible sketches world history, but the spirit in which this theme is conceived and the point of view from which it is written are not those taken by the modern historian. The Bible regards the history of the human race as being from beginning to end in reality one and single." And overleaf, if you go to the next page, I can probably do it myself. The first picture presented in the Bible is that of a human unity in its simplest form, that of a single family. That's talking about the out of Africa theory. The last picture is that of unity manifold and universal, in which all kindreds and tongues and peoples and nations are gathered into one and unified in the enjoyment of a common worship, a common happiness, a common glory. The great problem which, according to the Bible, confronts the human race in its progress is that of advancing from the barest, baldest unity through a long experience of multiplying diversities, till ultimately a balance between the two principles is struck. Poise is gained, and the two forces of variety and unity are blended. I think that's a wonderful quote. Blending the diversity into one. I suppose I can do this. Can we move on? And here we just have some pictures of the Baha'i World Centre on Mount Carmel, just around the corner from those caves, where the early humans mixed with the Neanderthals. A symbol of unity, I think. And the next page. And this was I don't know where I found this. I just found this chart. Starting with the center of unity coming around through cooperation into a new level of unity. I don't know whether that helps. We'll move on. So I'm closing with a quote from Baha'u'llah again. "The great being saith, O children of men, the fundamental purpose animating the faith of God and his religion is to safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race, and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship among men. This is the straight path, the fixed and immovable foundation. So in a sense, he's saying that this great human cycle that I'm talking about was designed over the many hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years, to come to an end point of unity on a global basis. I think that's in essence what I extract from this quote. That this whole historical evolution has been a divinely directed process with a view to achieving the unity of the human race on a global basis. Very profound, I think. So I think that's basically, oh no, I've got one more quote, a closing prayer. Oh, there we have some pictures of unity and diversity. So we have a closing prayer. Would somebody else like to read that? Any offer? No offers?
I'm trying to invite, see if anyone wants to unmute. Does anyone want to unmute to say the prayer?
Okay. Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree and make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family and the whole earth as one home. May they live together in perfect harmony. O God, raise aloft the banner of the oneness of mankind.
Thank you very much, everybody. You've been very patient.
So there are some questions, and actually there is a special special shout out to you from, oh my gosh, I just lost it. Well, when I find it out, I'll let you know.
Okay.
I was just on the, here we go. So David Jensen, he gives you greetings. He says he served with you at the Baha'i World Center in
Oh, really?
1986 to 1987.
Oh,
So he gives you his regards. This is on the Facebook.
oh.
So with that being said, there is a question about this concept of this similar beginning and this concept that humanity has dispersed. Why do you think the dispersion happened? Like, what was the divine wisdom, if we can even glean that?
I'm not sure I can really answer that question adequately. I think to some extent there's a mystery here, but it seems as though the planet was created to enable the human race to occupy it and prosper. There may be an element of a test involved in that people have to overcome their natural inclinations to attach themselves to more limited unities, and they have to surmount those limitations to recognize the unity of the human race and be able to establish a global civilization. Why it was done that way, I'm not sure I can answer that. I think that's a divine mystery. I'm a little bit lost, actually. I welcome other views.
And that's interesting. You brought the Tower of Babel. I was going to say Abel. The Tower of Babel. Could you enlighten people a little bit about the importance of the Tower of Babel from the Bible?
I think its importance lies more in its symbolic meaning, that as the original Homo sapiens came out of Africa and came up to the Twin Rivers, because that's sort of regarded where the origins of human civilization developed. The Tower of Babel represents the point at which the diversity of the human race really began in earnest, and in all its respects: religion, language, culture, physical appearance, etc. It represents the movement from unity to diversity, the origins of it. It's not so important as to whether there was a big tall building built trying to reach God, although that might have happened, but that to me is not the real meaning. The real meaning is its symbolism as the point at which the peoples of that time spread around the planet, and there's physical evidence to support that view that they moved from the Horn of Africa up to the Twin Rivers. Twin Rivers were a very fertile area, and yet maybe through the pressure of population and differences of opinions, and people had to spread. And they spread right down through Asia into ultimately Australia, spread up to Europe, and at a later time they spread up to what is now Russia and crossed into Alaska and came right down through the American continents, the two continents. So it's really the turning point, if you like, the symbol of the turning point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So these twin rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, that is so important for the Bible. We have a celebration that we just celebrated, a festival that we just had as Baha'is a few days ago, the Festival of Rezwan.
Right.
Now, what can we draw, you think, on this concept of unity between then and now with these?
Well, isn't it interesting that the Tower of Babel was, well, it was actually the location, we believe, is quite close to modern Baghdad. The city of Babylon was not far from Baghdad. And I find it very interesting that at this point in human history, when the planet is starting to come together, that Baha'u'llah, on his exile from Iran to Baghdad, announced his mission in the Garden of Rizwan in Baghdad. So in a sense, that's part of the completion of this cycle that I envisage. He's announcing that this is a new revelation, and this is the time for the human race to come together at the very central point where, or very close to the central point where the diversity really began in earnest. It's part of the completion of that cycle, I think. It wasn't announced in Iran. It wasn't announced in the Holy Land. It was announced in Baghdad, in the Twin Rivers, and beside one of the rivers. I think it's the Tigris. I think the symbolism there is very strong.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it very much. So there's a question from Miss Eileen Maddox. She's asking, what book is the long quotation of George Townsend from? any attributes
Oh,
for it. She says it's
he wrote,
marvelous.
he wrote 3 books. I'd have to look up. I've got 3 of them here. I took it from one of them, but I can't remember. I've got them in my library just beside me, but I'd have to find the quote. I'd have to find that and perhaps let you have that later.
Okay.
But I think he's got a very interesting approach to human history that is quite unique. He was
Thank
a
you.
great thinker, George Townsend. In fact, the Guardian relied on him very heavily in some of the authentic Baha'i writings. It was very highly regarded. Sorry,
So
I can't give you the
Maddox-
exact. I can't
Miss
give you the
Maddox,
exact book at this
she-
stage.
Okay.
Sorry.
Miss Maddox says she just unmuted.
Oh, I just wanted to thank Dr. Nicholson for sending that attribution later. And if you could send that, if you can send it to John, and John can send it to me.
Yeah.
Also, I think I appreciate that. Also, it's very interesting to note that Abraham, and there are 4 Abrahamic religions, also is believed to have come out of the southern Mesopotamian area, out of
Yeah.
Ur. And of course,
Yes.
and of
And
course,
Ur is very close to Baghdad and the
yes,
site, the alleged site of the Tower of Babel. They're all very
yes,
close together.
yes, yes,
I think Ur is slightly closer to the Gulf, but they're very close together.
yes. Ur is right down almost on the Gulf.
Yes.
And he was the father, really, of all the religions who came after him. And of course, then we start over again with the Bab and Baha'u'llah.
Yes.
So that really ties into.
I think Abraham, we don't know precisely when Abraham lived, but that would
No.
have been much later than the time of the Babel story.
Oh, yes, much later, but it
Mm.
continues the theme, the trend.
Yes. But as you say, it's part of that spread of diversity from the Twin
Yes.
Rivers down to Egypt and the Holy Land.
Yes.
Thank you.
So there is a question here from Clearwater. It says, he quotes that God could have made it united from the very beginning. This means that it was important in humanity's history to actually progress through this period of diversity. Is this because this period of diversity, is this because the process of creation and building worlds requires this fundamental process in general, and that it's not a limitation of the creative process of God?
Well, as I said, I can't explain why the Creator chose this process. There obviously is a deep meaning in it, but why we had to go through this process of unity to diversity back to unity, it has spiritual meaning, I think, primarily, but I can't explain it. I can't read the mind of God. We just have to accept that that's the process the human race has gone through in its maturation.
So someone actually mentioned here, and are you familiar with Josephine Baker?
Not particularly, no.
So person commented here, Miss Pamela Payne, on the Facebook chat and says that following the war, World War II, Baker spent most of her time at Les Mélans with her family. In 1947, she married a French orchestra leader, Joe Bouillon, and beginning in 1950, began to adopt babies from around the world. She adopted 12 children in all, creating what she referred to as her rainbow tribe and her experiment in brotherhood. She often invited people to the estate to see these children to demonstrate that people of different races could in fact live together harmoniously. That's intriguing.
Yes. But you could regard the whole planet as sort of a larger version of the same.
Yes.
What were once foreigners to us, we weren't very concerned with, are now all really part of our one big family. I was reflecting on that with the COVID in India. There would have been a time when the British were in India, they wouldn't have worried too much about all these people that died. They had famines and millions died. Nobody worried too much. Wasn't seen as a great concern. And now, of course, people are appalled at what's happening in India and are really critical of governments for not really acting adequately to deal with a pandemic. And we can see how through the failings of the systems of government, people are saying, we've got to have a better system. These people can't just die like that in flies. They're all part of our family. You wouldn't have said that 100, 200 years ago when the British were in India. The whole perspective is changing. We're seeing the whole planet as one big family. What happens in one place is our concern, even though it's in a different place to where we live. And we have to start thinking that way much more, I think. It's part of this maturation process. We're coming together as one human family. Perceptions are still lagging behind in many places.
It's funny that you mentioned the aspect of time in the last century in our perceptions. Only 100 years ago, it was normal across the planet. People believed that we were practically different species.
Yeah.
And
well, they used to think some people, like some in Africa, were subhumans. I remember seeing a ghastly photo, I think it was. The Belgians used to run the Congo, and the tribes in Congo were, backward tribes, primitive tribes, and they transplanted a family of indigenous Congo people to Belgium, and they put them in a little fenced yard with their little rough huts, and the Belgians used to come and watch them as though they were a zoo species doing their daily, whatever they did, cooking or whatever. It was like looking at a subspecies, a different animal. And we just can't think that way anymore. Things have changed so much, and they still need to change more.
yeah, thank you for
people
that.
are worried about the Chinese, about the Muslims there and the Tibetans. A century ago, we wouldn't have been concerned about that. Now people are genuinely concerned that with their treatment. Or in Myanmar, people are genuinely concerned. I've been to Myanmar, and people are genuinely concerned about what's happening there. It's really a tremendous change is happening.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning about this uniting of the peoples of the world, this concept of one world system under which all countries are to cohabitate and not to overwhelm the other, to share in the resources of the planet, to expend for the protection of all the peoples of the world. It's a intriguing point when you're bringing up this diversity, and then of course in America, the diversity we see now, and principally this diversity across the planet. It's definitely eye-opening, the role that America has to bring this spiritual unification of the world, to lead the world spiritually, but also the roles that all the people have in accepting this diversity. Because in America, for example, even though we have issues of our own, you still have this acceptance of diversity of different races. That is, I mean, it just by virtue of different races existing in the same place, it's become a necessity. Whereas in some places in the world today, you enter and you look different, it's bad. And this could be from Europe to South America to Eastern Asia, wherever you go. If there's this, what's the word, where it's just one kind of persons live there.
Gee, I don't know whether I should comment on the American situation. I've never been to America.
Well,
but,
we do have
enormous
issues.
challenges there.
Yeah, we do have issues, but it's not the same as where you find across the world, where you come in and you only have homozygous in for example, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, you only have homozygous whoever the people are that live there. You don't have any hetero. You don't have any mixing of outsiders.
Right.
In America, you have outsiders that are living together. America is a land of outsiders, and it's been the moral argument, which is why usually people win when they say, look, you can't treat someone different than another person in this country. But I'm saying in other countries, you go to anywhere in India with the caste system, you go to Chinese with the Han Chinese, you go to Poland with the Polish, you go to Africa in places where there's only Black people, you go to well, even I guess Australia, you guys have had issues with the indigenous people there. You go all around the world, when there is anything diverse right now, we still have that aversion. We have that aversion to this diversity. And America, for the time being, is the only place where you've had a nation of immigrants from all around the world that are having to cohabitate, whether we like it or not. But everywhere else around the world, they are implementing laws, nationalistic laws, to stop this exchange. For example, the Dominican Republic, their Supreme Court kicked out all of the generational Haitians. They're sent right back to their home in Haiti, even though their home was in fact the Dominican Republic. So the fact is that around the world, you have this move away from this mixing still today. But in America, despite the fact that there are issues with the mixing in America, that is not a reversible mixing here. In America, at least foreseeably, hopefully for the future, we don't foresee people being sent back to their generational homeland.
I can comment on the Australian experience. We've gone the other way. We used to have a white Australia policy, which was basically Anglo-Irish. But since after World War II, we had this policy of migration, which started with people from Europe, but has now expanded to people from all over the planet. And where I live, we have enormous diversity. you see coloured people, not in small numbers perhaps, but people from all over the world. I can walk down the street of my village and I'll see people from all over the world. And that stopped recently with the COVID thing because they've stopped people coming in. But before that, we had a big migration program from, and largely non-discriminatory.
So what about New Zealanders?
New Zealand is very similar. They have a large influx of Pacific Island people. And of course, they have the Maori, the indigenous people. So there is diversity in New Zealand as well.
So
Perhaps the difference between...
My limited understanding of Canada and particularly the former English territories. We're talking Canada, Australia, New Zealand. From all of them, New Zealand seems to be the most progressive, where they've been accepting of people that were previously subjugated. However, in Canada and Australia, Canada only within my lifetime, within the past 20 some years, has asked for forgiveness and has openly admitted its policy against its Indigenous people was wrong. Only in the Trudeau administration, they said they're sorry. Now, I'm not entirely sure about this process of reconciliation in Australia, but I'm very sure that the territories still has a lot of issues with the Aborigines.
Yeah, it's still an issue. Reconciliation still has a long way to go. But the difference probably between America and Australia is that the Indigenous population is small, whereas the coloured population in America, I understand, is quite large.
Yes, it is large. However, the reality remains that in the former British territories, you had a lot of this barbarism of the colonists towards the people who were colonized that continued far longer than that we have in America. In America, at least, despite the corruption that exists, you have the color of treaty that would at the very least give some legal standing, if at all. Whereas in so many places around the world, Papua New Guinea, they were just slaughtered. The Aborigines in Papua New Guinea were just slaughtered by the existing population that colonized there. And all around Australasia, you have this murder with impunity. And yes, the fact is that there's so few of them because they were all killed. That's the reality of it. That's why there's so few.
I don't think there ever were huge numbers, even before colonization. They were scattered peoples. But you're true. It's true. There was still a long way to go in Australia. There's a big challenge. We don't have treaties in Australia. But I was commenting more on the program of migration from many countries that's been very active since World War II. So that Australia is now quite a plural society.
It's a positive growth indeed. But this all being said, it's nice to be able to speak with an international perspective in mind now, because in America, we have a lot of issues, but inside America, we're usually blind to the world's issues and the world's common plight of this racialism that you find around the planet.
Yes.
And the point is, though, that despite America's many faults, in a spiritual sense, there is that leadership towards this unity of the planet in a very roundabout way of looking at it.
Well, the Baha'i writings make it very clear that America has a predominant role in that process, so that it can lead the world, but it also has its own issues. And they're I'm sure they're very challenging issues.
Yes, because you do have that representation, because you do have more people.
Yeah, but my point is that the overall process is already fixed. We're heading to unity.
Yes.
And there will be resistance. Of course, there will be resistance. there's still these old perspectives based on diversity and priorities between diverse groups. But the overall pattern is already set, and the tide of history is, in my view, set. And it's the challenge is to get with that tide. It's a divinely directed tide. It's a great challenge, and we have to deal with it. And I think it's largely one of perception, spiritual perception, primarily. I wish you well in America. I hope it can be resolved ultimately, but it's going to take time, patience, and a lot of love, I suspect.
So there is this
For me-
letter I found.
For me, I'm concentrating on getting with the process of unity. That's my emphasis. That's what I'm on about these days.
Yes. So the Universal House of Justice of the Baha'is of the world clearly states that world unity is not just possible, but we've passed the point of no return to achieve this world unity in their letters in the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
And there's actually a letter from January 18, 2019 to the Baha'is of the world. If I may, I'd like to read a part of it.
Please.
Dearly loved friends, half a century after Baha'u'llah summoned the kings and rulers to be reconciled among themselves and enjoined on them the establishment of peace on earth, the great powers of that era were plunged into war. It was the first conflict to be regarded as a world war, and it is remembered as the conflagration of horrific severity. The unprecedented scale and ferocity of the bloodshed has seared it on the consciousness of every succeeding generation. And yet, from out of the ruin and suffering, possibilities blossomed for a new order to bring stability to the world, notably at the Paris Peace Conference, which opened 100 years ago on this day, on that day, which is January 18, 2019, 100 prior. In the years that followed, despite the repeated crises into which international affairs were thrown, Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, could discern the progress, however fitful, of the forces working in harmony with the spirit of the age. These forces have continued to move humanity towards an age of peace, not merely a peace which rules out armed conflict, but a collective state of being manifesting unity. Notwithstanding, it remains a long journey, and it proceeds in fits and starts. We find it propitious at this moment to reflect on the progress made on that journey, the contemporary challenges to peace, and the contribution to its attainment that Baha'is are called to make. There have been at least 3 historical moments in the last 100 years when it seemed as if the human race was reaching for real, lasting peace, albeit always falling short because of weaknesses it could not overcome. The first moment, as a result of the Paris Conference, was the establishment of the League of Nations, an organization intended by its founders to secure peace at the international level. I'm sharing so everyone can see.
Thank you.
So I'm here. It was the means by which, for the first time in history, the system of collective security enjoined on the world's rulers by Baha'u'llah was seriously envisaged, discussed, and tested. But ultimately, the peace agreement that concluded the war was fatally flawed, and the League was not able to prevent the Second World War, judged by historians to be the deadliest conflict in human history. Just as the first significant step towards world peace followed a period of appalling conflict, so did the second, when not only was the United Nations organization formed from the ashes of the League, but a system of international economic institutions came into being and historical advances were made relating to the human rights and international law. In rapid succession, many territories under colonial rule became independent nations, and arrangements for regional cooperation grew markedly in depth and range. The post-war decades, however, were also characterized by an atmosphere of brooding and often open hostility between the world's two major power blocs. Known familiarly as the Cold War, it spilled over into actual wars in various regions of the world and brought humanity perilously close to a conflict involving nuclear weapons. Its peaceful termination towards the end of the 20th century was an occasion for relief, giving rise to explicit calls for the establishment of a new global order. This was the third movement when universal peace seemed to be within grasp. Efforts to put in place new systems for international cooperation and to strengthen existing ones received great impetus as a series of world conferences on themes of importance to humanity's future were convened by the United Nations. New opportunities for consensus emerged, and the spirit of collaboration propelling progress also found expression in the mandates given to certain international institutions charged with administering justice. This purposeful, deliberative process culminated at the turn of the century in the Millennium Forum, a meeting of representatives of over 1,000 civil society organizations from more than 100 countries, followed by the Millennium Summit, an unparalleled gathering of world leaders, which led to agreement on a set of objectives representing a shared ambition of humanity. Styled the Millennium Development Goals, they became rallying points for collective action in the ensuing years. These various advances, despite their many limitations and imperfections, and the horrifying conflicts that continue to unfold during this time, stand nonetheless as signs of a widespread, gradual, but inexorable rise in global consciousness on the part of the Earth's peoples and their attraction to universal peace, to solidarity, to collaboration, to compassion, and to equality.
Universal justice, not peace.
Huh?
You said universal peace, it was universal justice.
I'm sorry, yes. I'll reread. And their attraction to universal justice, to solidarity, to collaboration, to compassion, and to equality. I want to finish on this, unless someone would like to read this in my place. Is anyone in the audience?
Well, it's a little bit overtaken by more recent events, which would seem to suggest a reversion to a more confrontational position between the leading powers. But I think that's only a temporary reversal. I think eventually things will get back on the right path. Hopefully it won't lead to another global conflagration.
Well, here it says it, thus do the forces of disintegration regroup and gain ground. In mentioning your point, the House of Justice says, so be it.
Yeah.
So in answer,
for every advance, there's an opposition, and things move in waves. Crisis and victory.
Yes, the House of Justice responds to this very issue. The unification of humanity is unstoppable by any human force. The promises made by the prophets of old and by the author of the cause of God himself testify to this truth. Yet the course humanity takes to achieve its destiny may very well be tortuous. The tumult raised by the contending peoples of the earth threatens to drown out the voices of those noble-minded souls who, in every society who call for an end to conflict and struggle. As long as that call goes unheeded, there is no reason to doubt that the world's current state of disorder and confusion will worsen, possibly with catastrophic consequences, until a chastened humanity sees fit to take another significant step, perhaps this time decisive, towards enduring peace. So in response to what you just said, the House of Justice very clearly states,
Yes.
we're going to be probably chastened until we take that decisive step.
Yes. Going back to that comment about justice, not peace, I think what the House is saying is, unless we have universal justice, we can't have universal peace. And the present way the planet is organized is not conducive for universal justice. So we have a some way to go, quite some way to go.
Yes, sir, we do.
And maybe it will finish up in some terrible crisis. We don't know.
Well, irrespective of that, this tragedy that's going to result just simply by not having the means to avoid, to stop, to combat that tragedy, we still have at our disposal the solutions, the very solution to create enduring peace. We have that. It's in our hands, and humanity just has to heed this warning.
Yeah. Well, in terms of my presentation, we have to accept that we're moving towards unity, global unity, in all respects. And only by adopting that perspective is it possible to overcome these terrible differences. It's very clear in the Baha'i writings. I think it's clear in all the religions, actually, particularly in the Baha'i writings.
So as we increase in our nationalistic policies, innocent people, immigrants from around the world who choose to, as a result of this displacement from all these conflicts that are being caused, this commingling of the peoples of the world, which the House of Justice has in another letter described, these people will be forced to enter new lands, and more significant will be this rejection of the countries that their doors were previously open, and this festering of the world and now this equalization is taking place, but eventually when the doors close and people are forced to remain in their homelands to effectively participate in what they were trying to run away from, which is the last century and this century's allowance for this escape from these situations, as people are kept within those cages, that is where they intend to escape. This world and the fuse it's only going to light for these countries, these disadvantaged peoples who will not tolerate their situation any longer. One can only imagine what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Because right now we have this.
I don't think we need to spend too much time thinking about that.
But right now we have this lessening of pressure. You have people leaving lands to escape persecution, and they're able to. But a time's going to come when, as a result of nationalist policy, they won't allow these things. Your country is one of them. People from New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and what have you, they enter Australia, they're being deported in mass because they're not being accepted. Across Europe, nationalism is increasing. America, nationalism right now, they say with the current status as it is now, is held at bay, but it's not. It's only increasing. Around the world, the banner of nationalism is once again being raised. It could be China, it could be America, it could be Russia, it could be all the countries of Europe and Australasia put together. This nationalism is increasing. Only recently, the Baha'i faith has now been banned in Tunisia. Again,
I hadn't heard that. But my answer to you to that is that let that be so. But what can we do about it? The first thing we can do is get our own perceptions right. our own allegiances, our own beliefs. We have to start with ourselves and work outwards. We can do it in our own community. We can, in our relations with day-to-day relations with people, we can indicate we don't have any prejudices or discrimination. We can associate, and we can have lectures like this. We can write about it. We can talk about it. We can put it into action in our own lives. I think that's the real issue. It's not to get bogged down in all these negative events and reverses. The reverses are going to happen, as the House says. It's going to, but if we don't need to get bogged down in that. It all starts with our own beliefs and perspective. And I'm sure every one of us have still got work to do on ourselves and in our relations with others.
Plenty.
Plenty. And that will gradually spread out. That should be our constant, that should be our emphasis. We get the idea of this great circle coming together. We accept that. We accept that there will be reverses, but then we work on ourselves. None of us are at the stage of Abdul Baha. He could mix with anybody on the planet and show love to everybody on the planet. We've all got a long way to go.
Indeed,
That's
we do. We do.
That's where I think we have to get the big picture in our mind, but then we have to put it into action in our own lives.
Yes.
The more
We have to
people
be
do
the
that,
change we want to see, right?
the more people that do that, the quicker the changes will come.
Yes.
I think I've said enough tonight. Unless there's any other questions.
Well, it does not seem to be the case, and it is actually a very propitious time to end for today, as it is about an hour and 30 minutes into the presentation. And this is typically our stopping point anyway. And I think it was an excellent place to conclude.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Yes, and thank you. The first activities we must first do is work within our sphere of influence, our communities. This is Jeremiah pointing this out in the chat. I agree with him, and I think we all come to agreement with that. But I want to say again, for all of you who have joined us on Facebook and YouTube, thank you for joining us. Today was a very special session, as you, having listened to this, now understand this unity of the world, this return to unity, taking back this unity, which was once ours again. I hope you all have a beautiful Sunday. Thank you for joining us, and please be sure to see our next session on www.clearwaterbahais.org. Thank you, Dr. Nicholson.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.